Well, Aaron, Cameron, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on the show today. We're really excited to chat with you about Scare Package 2.
Rad Chad's Revenge.
Rad Chad's Revenge.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We're very excited to be here. And yeah, just had fun hanging out with you guys, seeing the film in Columbus, and it's great to be able to chat about it.
I've always heard that horror anthologies are really fucking hard to make. So what was it about that first one that made you want to do it again?
Well, you guys know. I mean, you guys know now too, as well, right? So you kind of been through the process with Symphony, but I mean, really, look, I will say this franchise, it's crazy to say that word, but this, Scare Package universe franchise, whatever the hell this has become, really is because of Cameron, because I did not want to make it. I was like, no, there's too many anthologies out there, and VHS is too good, and I love Southbound, and Creepshow's coming out, and we can't compete with that. And he kept saying, yeah, but there's all these great people we want to work with, and like, can we find something? And then that weekend he kind of kept being Cameron and kept kind of nagging me about it, and in a loving way. And then finally I was like, okay, let me kind of like research this and see what we can do. And that weekend I kind of stumbled on, I love the comedies, I love those segments in particular, really stood out. And then the horror tropes were always fun for me to kind of play with, and I was like, what if we just centered it all around that? And then that became a hook that was different. So I knew there was something that was there, but at the same time we also thought it would be easier. We're like, oh, we can just make 6-7 shorts, like that's no big deal.
We know how to do this.
Yeah, like you could do a short in a day, right? So like there's a movie in a week. No, nothing like that. I mean, we took some, like what Brad Miska, Roxanne Benjamin, and others did for Southbound, I thought was really clever, where they had the same composer, they even had the same DP, the same sound designers and colorists and all that, to kind of give some cohesion to it. So I was like, ooh, that makes sense. So we leaned into that. But then what that ends up doing, though, is it means that each of the segments really become like an entire movie. You have to like deliver an entire movie, and you can't be doing two things at the same time. You can't be doing two scores at the same time and two sound designs for the most part at the same time. It's really hard to juggle. So you kind of have to create this assembly line of how to get that going. And that credit then goes to our other producing partner, Alex Uding, who's our post supervisor and kind of keeping the ship moving, because it's a beast. I mean, we spend more time on Scare Package 2 in particular. Scare Package 2, we spent more time making this, developing this, getting this, to today than any of the movies we produced over the last couple of years. And it feels like we've made 4 movies
since started. It feels like we made like 4 movies since we started Scare Package 2 that aren't Scare Package 2.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's weird.
Yeah, it's crazy scenario. So, but then, people liked it, and that caught us off guard. Some people even have tattoos. They dressed up in Halloween, and we're like, oh my God, what is happening? And so it just kind of became something that, it's like, well, now what? I guess we got to do this again, but we were very excited to do it. And then it was just like, what idea do you want to take with that? And that took some time too.
Yeah, I think we always thought that there was a fertile ground of sequels and prequels and all kinds of, just a universe with that Scare Package idea and IP. The only question was, is anybody going to care enough to want it? And we were obviously very surprised when people did care enough to want it. And so then it was all about kind of figuring out, okay, we have all these crazy ideas. Which one is crazy enough to be the sequel?
It's funny you say you guys were like a little bit trepidatious about entering like the horror anthology world, because I feel like there was a real gap that you don't even realize in meta horror, in self-referential horror, and like stuff that's straight for horror fans. These movies feel really community based, like you laugh with them because they're riffing on the movies that you like grew up with and stuff. And I find more horror anthologies, they don't have that sense of fun and playfulness. So I feel like you guys really tapped into something there.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I mean, actually, it's interesting, something that I've kind of stumbled on, and I talked about this. We just had a screening in Austin. I talked about it a little bit there, but what I loved that was kind of an ancillary effect of the first scare package that we didn't expect to happen was people watched it, and you'd have a couple, and you'd have, partner A, diehard horror, partner B, not really into horror, but they're both enjoying it. But then the diehard horror fan would turn to their partner and say, oh, by the way, did you know that's actually a reference to this? And they're like, oh no. Then the next thing you know, they as a couple are now watching Dream Warriors, or Hellbound. And I was like, wait a second, if we can lean into this, and then the second one, we really kind of like try to make that something that to kind of create an experience, because I miss the days of, going to my friends with tapes. I used to work at a video store, and I was the person. Cameron he also worked at a video store. And,
surprise.
Yeah, big surprise.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we grew up in that world. It very much is part of our DNA in every way. But there was something fun about, someone would come in, I was like, ooh, you haven't seen this, you got to see this. And how do you get someone excited about that? And how do you recreate that now? And you can do it on the internet, and there's some things you can do and promote. And we try to be very, uplifting about, our fellow indie horror purists and filmmakers. But what if the movie itself could do that? And I don't know if I'm getting too grandiose, but like this. But really, like, if we could put enough references and things, and references that are narrative driven, right? So they're putting the plot forward while also paying homage. If that couple watching can then, after that, now they're putting in Dream Warriors, which, by the way, is also available on Shudder. So you can put that in right after. And then they're watching and like, oh, and that scene becomes even more funny to them, in Scare Package, because they've now seen this.
Yeah.
And at the same time, now we've just created more of a community. And this movie, even though it's for the diehard horror fans, inadvertently, or well, now it's very specifically, becomes a little bit of almost like gateway horror. Does that make sense?
Oh,
That's
like,
great.
It's this weird thing. It's a fun idea.
Funny too, because I feel like that happened very gradually. Like early on, we knew we wanted to do comedy, but I think like the references, I think just kind of happened as we were writing. It was like, oh, that would be kind of funny. Next thing you know, it's like, we got to get so many references. Like it all happened so gradually in the first one. And then people just loved those references. I think because we didn't punch down, and it wasn't, and it was just like, hey, we love these movies. So if we can find a little, nod and do it a little more clever than, naming a character, Wes Carpenter.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it drives me nuts in every horror movie. But
Same.
we can do it in a way that's clever and funny, and some people don't notice, then it just adds like an extra like layer to the watch, I think, that people like.
It's so cool that people are discovering horror movies, like classic horror movies, based on references you guys are making. Because I think that's kind of how, I don't know about you, but like that would have, like cartoons like Animaniacs or The Simpsons making references to like, Psycho or Friday the 13th were how I got into horror movies as a kid as well. Like you can sort of like as a kid.
All my Poe is from The Simpsons.
Right? Yeah, like you can tell like, oh, they're referencing something, but I don't know what it is. And like you just need like an adult to tell you what movie to watch. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, that made that cartoon so much better. And it also kind of makes sense that your movie's so fucking cartoonish. It's pretty goddamn funny.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of that. I mean, and that happened to me as well. There was plenty. Well, and that's what became so fun about Scare Package 2, because now, the first one's about tropes, and this is obviously also about tropes, but there are no bigger horror tropes than in horror sequels. And we didn't get in. Most of my friends did not get in watching Friday the 13th Part 1 or Halloween, even the original Halloween. Like I think I watched Halloween 2, I think was the first one I watched. And so you're coming into these movies in the franchise later, and then you're having to kind of rework what happens. I remember realizing, like, why isn't Jason in the first Friday the 13th? Like that didn't make any sense to me, and so I think, and what happens is, in a similar kind of fashion, they make a movie, they have no idea that it's going to be a hit, and then they have to make sequels to it, and that kind of causes the Saw effect, as I talk about, which obviously is a big influence on this. And so we're doing the same thing. I'm like, oh, what a fun thing. Like that became this perfect angle for us of like, if you're going to talk about horror tropes, there's no bigger trope to overcome than Laurie Strode can cut off Michael Myers' head in H2O and he's back in the next movie. It's just a driver, it's like, what? Like, that's so fun and so crazy. So like, if that gave us this opportunity to kind of like, we already in Scare Package, we already talk about like, there's no rules. We can do whatever we want. We can throw anything in there. And in the first movie, there was a scene where we wanted flashlights. And we're like, but they don't have flashlights in the previous scene, and this isn't going to work. I was like, oh, it looks so great. And then I just leaned to Jeremy. I was like, look, give them flashlights. And on set, I was like, Jeremy plays Rad Chad. I was like, look, just say, where'd you guys get your flashlights? I brought mine. And that was it. And then that became, and it was like, that was perfect because it's a trope that exists in movies. But yet we're allowed to get away with it. And it becomes a highlight, not just like a look, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that kind of gave us this room to play.
Yeah, it's so freeing as you're writing stuff, because you normally write stuff and you're like, the logic on that doesn't really work. But it'd be so cool if we could make it happen. You have to keep reminding yourself when you're writing scare package stuff. It's like, no, we can do it. We just have to like hang a lantern on it and be like, look how dumb this is, and then do it. And like we had the whole time we were once we kind of landed on, the Saw thing, we were like, we wanted to just go as crazy as possible with like sequel like retconning and stuff like that. And like the whole time you're like, oh gosh, is it going too far? Is it going to be too, are people all this? And then you watch Saw and you're like, I don't know that we've gone far enough.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, like as crazy as some of the stuff in your movie is, it's not anything close to how wild the Saw sequels become.
No.
Like you're still quite tame compared to some of the Saw movies.
There is literally a scene that's like the apex of the Saw series where it starts as just Jigsaw in a room, and then it's Jigsaw and Shawnee Smith in a room, and then it's Jigsaw and Shawnee Smith and Angus McFadden. It's the same scene over and over again. We just weren't told that there were 8 people in the room. You keep seeing the same scene. It's like, surprise, this guy was in the back left corner.
Dun, 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 dun.
So ridiculous. Like, I don't know how they got away with it.
Yeah. Well, in that we were in so when we were writing this was when Spiral was coming out. So a lot of people were revisiting these Saw films. And we had kind of were thinking about an escape room idea, and Saw was already kind of in the zeitgeist of what we wanted to do, because our focus was going to be 90s and 2000s horror, and that's such an iconic franchise of that time, what was going on there. But I literally, like, there's a moment at the end of the movie, without giving anything away, in Scare Package 2, where Graham Skipper character, Dwight turns and he's like, do you know what's going on? And that is me watching Carrie Elways show up at the end of like Saw 6 or whatever. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, I don't remember this at all. But I still enjoyed it. Like, I have fun watching those movies, but like, they're wild. And then that just kind of, again, as Kim was saying, it became this like freeing moment where we're like, oh shit, like this is what we can do. And then the next step of that is, now you're doing the Saw kind of parody thing, and it's like, what are the dumbest Saw traps that you can make? And that became even more fun.
Oh man, the I will say Wicker Man remake related trap had me on the floor.
So
I cannot handle that scene. It kills me. We've watched it twice now. It kills me all the time.
That's so great. Like, and what's so weird about that one was, and Cam could attest to this, I was just like, so I'm very, very passionate about my horror. And look, there is something to be said about, the commentary in horror and the discourse about, gatekeeping and stuff. And we try to talk about that in the movie, and that's something I do want to touch on. But there was a time where I was getting really frustrated at people talking about, elevated horror and, what that meant. And I was like, there's no elevated comedy, there's no elevated drama. Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
This doesn't make sense to me. And people kept saying, well, horror's a B genre, it's a B movie. And it just kept upsetting me. And there was an afternoon, and I was like, okay, it was my like afternoon to like write in Jigsaw space. And I was writing all that dialogue. And then it just came to me. There was not a desire to make a Wicker Man thing. It was, or anything like that. It was just, you called horror a B movie. Well, the real horror is the 10,000 Bs I just put inside you. and I wrote that down. I texted it to like our text chat, and they're all laughing, and they're like, what are we going to do with that? I'm like, I don't know.
That's my first answer always. Like, that's really funny. How the hell are we going to do that?
Yeah. It's normally Cam saying like, Aaron, what are you doing? Like, we're not going to do that.
I'm the
How are we going to pick that off?
I'm the one who goes like, yeah, that's cool, but I don't think it's possible.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, that means we have to do it then, and I get more excited when Cam's like negative on it sometimes.
We don't ever really set out either. Yeah, like you're right. We don't set out to be like, all right, well, this room should be a Wicker Man room, and it's like, what's a really weird, funny concept, and then like, well, if it's bees, then I guess Wicker Man and Candyman and all these like just kind of are the obvious thing. It's like, what's a funny set piece, and then you can kind of, there's obviously, anybody who's seen anything Scare Package can tell you there's a million, Halloween and Friday the 13th references. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's not like we decide we want to do Wicker Man and then suddenly there are bees. It very much works the other way around.
I
Yeah,
love
there's
I
just
love
a
it
phrase.
sounds like you guys really just kind of hold each other hostage with things you're passionate about. Because like as much as Cameron's like against the whole like crazy idea you have, you were against the anthology in general at the very beginning. But it's just like as
Rarely
long as
agree
one
on
of you's
anything.
passionate, yeah, okay.
Rarely agree on anything. So when we do agree on something, we're like, this is probably the good idea.
This is great.
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna get at. Like when you're writing this, is it really just a matter of like trying to get the other guy to laugh?
Kind of. It's like, it's like, what is the craziest, weirdest, funniest concept? That's why I don't think we had any idea whether anybody was going to like Scare Package 1, because it's very much like we wrote a movie that like the two of us and like 7 other people would get. Like we aimed it so at ourselves that we had no idea there were so many other people like ourselves, because it's such like narrow comedy
Yeah.
that when everyone, well, not everyone, but when a lot of people really liked it, we were as surprised as anybody else. But yeah, it's just, we try to make ourselves laugh. We try to hit like when we kind of cracked and Aaron, it was Aaron's idea, but when we cracked the Tommy Jarvis thing in the first movie where Chase shaves his head, it was just like we're writing it and we're just cracking up. We're like, this is it. It's if we're laughing when we're writing it, it's gonna work.
Yeah, and that definitely, I mean, without giving anything away, but there's a moment at the end of the film, a pretty big moment that I remember Cam's like, we can't do that. And I was like, but we can. And because it wasn't written with that intending to happen, the ending. And again, without giving it away, there's a funding that happens there. And that became, and once we started to dive into it and we just started laughing more and more, we realized that, okay, if like, Alex, Sean, all of us that are kind of like making this together, and Cameron, if we're Farrell, if we're like digging into this idea and we start laughing, because the first film showed us other people will laugh too. And we were like, oh, wow, okay, cool. It's not just us. Because we truly were like off on an island making that thing with private money. Shutter wasn't involved. Nobody was involved, Scare Package 1 was just us and our friends and like jokes that we thought would work. And it was born out of frustration in an industry where my cut of the film of Camera Obscura, our first feature, was not ever released. And, and it was like, you know what? Like, fuck it. Like, we're just going to do what we want to do. And we're going to see what happens. And we're going to roll with the punches. And if no one likes it, no one likes it. But at least we're going to be very happy with what we're putting out. And we are, and I'm very, very proud of that movie, and equally proud of the sequel, and so we just, once we realized that some people are going to laugh at the same shit we are, then we're going to lean into it and just go even further.
Yeah, there was basically no one there to tell us no, and so we just kept doing it. And then on the second one, Shutter was like, yeah, no, we're not going to say no, just go nuts. And so we were just like, I don't know how many chances we're going to get to just unfiltered do the craziest stuff that we want to do, but we better make it crazy. Like that's kind of the aim, is like to hit that spot where the audience is like, they're not really going to do that, are they?
Yeah, no, you guys really, really go for it. I also love too that like your references aren't tied specifically always to horror. I'd say 99% of the time they are, but you have like an incredible Drive gag, like from the movie Drive, that is the funniest goddamn thing I've seen in years. Like it's just like as soon as it's, and like you do a great job of recreating this. I don't want to give it away, but there's a scene in Drive that you guys basically recreate, and it looks like almost shot for shot the same.
Oh yeah,
perfect example of a scene where we were like, is anybody gonna let us do, like,
yeah,
surely someone's gonna stop us from too crazy, right?
Well, and it was also getting an actor that was getting Bruce that was willing to kind of do that. He actually just saw the movie for the first time this past weekend. Bruce Davis, who plays Bert in that scene. And, and I couldn't believe that he was going to go for it. And man, did he go for it. It was one of those moments. So Drive is one of my favorite films. If you look on my Letterboxd, it's one of my 4, it's a very influential movie to me. And there's just a couple really beautiful sequences that happen. But I will say, the original inspiration was it started off not being a Drive reference. It was going to be a Bodyguard reference.
Oh, wow. I mean, that makes sense.
He's a bodyguard.
And so the end of it kind of like the end of that sequence is kind of like a bodyguard thing. But then once it started happening, I was like, oh, whoa, this is what we need to do. And it was one of the, and I love it's actually the only example. I take pride in that, you know, our references are not, it's not like stop the movie and do a reference. They're the majority of them, all other ones I feel like are narrative based. So it's like, we need this to happen in order to kind of keep the story going. And in that narrative, there become these like fun, you know, throwbacks and things to play with. This was one where I was like, nope, we're going to like slow everything down in this crazy scenario and just do this whole and like the whole world goes away, like literally goes black around them. And it's just this because I don't know, it was just something romantic in my mind. And it was so much fun to shoot. And I will say, we almost cut it. We almost cut the scene just because it wasn't narrative based. So once you get into editing, you're always like, what is the propulsiveness of this and what's needed? But again, because it's scare package and it's kind of like our baby and all this, I was like, you know what? No, I'm not gonna cut it. Even though like normal editing world and like other directors I work with, I'd be like, you need to cut that because it's not moving your story along as much. But it's just so fun to me, and I'm really proud of it. And it is. We were watching the scene. We were like making it match perfectly. So we'll end up doing a side by side like later after it's out.
Oh, that's amazing.
Side by side of the scenes and show, because I think that's gonna be fun.
I mean, I think the obvious question here is like, what was there anything that did end up getting cut that you were really passionate about, or was there anything in the script phase that you just kind of had to say goodbye to before you started shooting?
I mean, so I will say, so we call them rooms in the way the narrative works. So like they wake up in a different kind of escape room. The last room, right, which it's in the trailer, so I'm not really giving anything away, but it's kind of a recreation of Radshad's Horror Emporium, in that only a post-apocalyptic kind of version of that, because we had to build it, because Radshad's in Scare Package 1 was at Vulcan Video in Austin. Vulcan Video went out of business during the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
So we couldn't shoot it, and we couldn't go back there. There was no video store to use. So, and we couldn't just go to a random video store. Like that didn't make sense. So we built it because we're madmen and don't have enough money, but we still found a way to do it thanks to, you know, Morgan Fryer and Joshua Miller, you know, our amazing art team. But in that sequence, what was there originally, it was going to move into like, I used to love the show Double Dare on Nickelodeon. I don't know if that's like a thing that you guys know in Canada. No. But so anyway, it's a show on Nickelodeon. It's basically it's like families are fighting, and they go through this thing called there's like an obstacle course that they go through, and they're wearing like all these outfits, and they're throwing gook on them and guys and all this. You know, they're like literally like going through like a human car wash, and they're like sliding down a slide of a mouth that goes into like all this goo and stuff, and they're having to capture these flags and take these flags to the next thing. And so I kind of wanted to do a Double Dare riff, you know, where they all wake up with like the headgear and the shoulder pads and like the bright, and it's like a 1990s, 80s show. And I wanted to do that. That's called Double Death. And then they wake up and they have to go through this like death obstacle course. And it was really fun, and it was there. But then it was actually Alex Uding, our producer partner, is like, no. We got to go back to RAD. And he was so right. It just was a bigger set piece than we anticipated at the end, and we didn't have the budget for it. So it was like, okay, well, I guess we're just paying for this one ourselves then, but we're going to do it. And that's kind of what happened to make that work. Yeah.
I think my favorite part of that Double Dare room that never happened when we were kicking it around is that they go through all this crazy stuff, like basically a Saw version of an obstacle course. They go through all this crazy stuff, and the last thing is super easy, but it requires Rich Summers' character to have two hands.
That's right.
And I love that so much, that they go through the crazy stuff, and all he has to do is like pull a lever or something, and he can't do it because he only has the one hand, and that's what he does. What we ended up with was better, but I do miss
that was funny. Yeah, that was really funny. Yeah, making Rich Summer, who I still can't. I was just talking with him today, you know, and he's so excited about the movie and everything. And it's like, you know, from Mad Men, and he said all these huge things. He was just like, while he was shooting with us, he was going to do this HBO Max, you know, White House Plumbers series and all that. And we were trying to find the time and scheduling. And, you know, for him to like show up and like he loses an arm, giving much away at the very beginning of the movie,
Yeah.
and then the whole movie, he's got one arm, and that's not an easy thing, like you have the rig and getting you in, and it was like 100 degrees in Oklahoma where we were shooting, and he was just like dying. His memories of set, every time he talks about it, it's like I don't know, I just blacked out, it was 100 degrees. And, so I still can't believe he went through all, him and Graham going through obviously the skin stuff and being that the whole time too.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about that. Fucking Graham Skipper
Yeah.
getting skinned and then being alive the rest of the movie skinned.
He's hilarious in it, the whole movie.
Yeah, he's really funny. Like it's funny. I knew Graham, and I knew him a little, and I obviously knew of him and had seen him in a bunch of stuff, but I had no idea he could be that funny. It was really Aaron who was like, no, he could totally do it. And like I did not know he could be that funny. And because every time I see him in, he's kind of, I don't know about serious is the right term, but not like overly comedic. And he just killed it. Like the minute he read, we were just like, oh yeah, he's perfect.
Right, just like a million fun reactions from him and everything.
He's such a great proxy character. Like watching as a horror fan, you are Graham Skipper in those scenes. Like when you say he's like, "What's going on?" Like you feel like these are my eyes and ears.
Yeah. There is meant to be him and Jesse, Zoe Graham's character, kind of are the audience a number of times in the film, and it's always kind of meant to be that way. But yeah, but Graham was someone, I just had always believed in. I knew he had it, and it was so excited to work with him. I'd wanted to work with him for a while, and and it was also he was one of the people who I knew was a diehard Hellraiser fan, and I knew would be like down. That was one of the things too, because there's not many people who you're going to go through like hours of makeup. I mean, like it's not easy stuff what he's going through. I mean, there's a bodysuit, and it's so much more than that. What they're doing. And he's doing hours of makeup. It's a very vulnerable kind of thing. You feel so exposed, even though you're like you are, but you aren't, in this weird way. And then you have to act as that. Like I knew, because the motif of the film, like in each of these rooms, someone is quote unquote dying. So I knew people would expect. And originally he gets skinned alive and he dies. And then I was like, no. And then in Hellbound, I love when he shows up in that white suit, and she does too. They both do. And Hellraiser too. And that white suit, and it's so ridiculous. There's like blood seeping through it and all this. I'm like, that's funny. And then it gave us an opportunity too, because then you didn't have to do the whole suit. So it kind of like made it a little bit easier as far as what needed to be done. But I mean, for him to do that and then stay, I knew Graham would down because he's such a fan of the franchise and was so gung-ho, and he just brought I think he's a scene stealer and everything he does with that.
Yeah, absolutely. He steals the show, and he also, from obviously there's a lot of funny people in this movie, but yeah, Graham is just steals so many scenes. Never complained about wearing that suit, not one time, and it was a huge pain in the ass. So he's one of the genuine good ones. I mean, we had a lot of those on this movie, thankfully, but he's great.
Yeah, we didn't have any, and look, nobody goes on a podcast and is like, this person was tough. Like, that doesn't ever happen. But truthfully, we had a very, very accommodating cast on this. Everyone just bent over backwards, and because this is, again, it's the lowest budget movie that we have on the Paper Street slate.
Wow.
We make a lot of movies, and this is our lowest budget one, and everybody was just like so passionate about it, and that just meant a lot, and it made it so much easier to get through those tougher days.
Well, the best thing about Scare Package is because there's no one really telling us what to do. We just get to work with our friends, and we get to bring in people that we like and that we know and that we want to work with. And so no one's forcing actors we don't know on us or anything. And it does make for such a more pleasurable experience. And I mean, it was, like Aaron said earlier, it was hot. That shoot was hot. It was in Oklahoma. It was unseasonably warm, even for Oklahoma. We were in a warehouse with a metal roof.
Okay.
We could not cool that place down fast enough. And like, no one complained. Everyone was down. Everyone was made the best of it. It was, the cast was incredible.
I love that you, I love how much attention you guys put into the wraparound story. Cause like, that's pretty much all we've really talked about so far here today, is your wraparound chunk that sort of introduces the other anthology segments. Most anthologies, the wraparound is just like, it's just there, you know, like it, and sometimes it's necessary because you've got so many segments. But I love how much attention you guys put into it. But how do you pick the filmmakers for the individual segments in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes this, special. So yeah, we did look, the original focus of the first care package was the wraparound needs to be more significant. It needs to be something that if you didn't have the segments was still a cohesive movie.
Mm-hmm.
So we obviously took that further, and and because Cameron and I control it, I directed even more of this movie because we're selfish and we fell in love with it. But look, bringing in the directors is always really tough because there's so many people that we love and we want to work with, and now we had set a tone, with the first film. We kind of knew the direction we wanted to go and how that was going to work. And the first person we hired back was Anthony Cousins, who there was a discussion about bringing all the directors back, and like that would be really fun because I had never seen a sequel to a segment, in an anthology. So I haven't really seen that happen. So I was like, why don't we just do all of that? But that became a scheduling nightmare with everyone, and it just was not plausible for a number of reasons. And then it was like, okay, let's go all new. But what was so fun about what Anthony did, and the night he came back again, he had already made a sequel in our first film, right? So his night he came back in part 4, The Final Kill. And so he's already kind of playing on the tropes of sequels within that, and what had come before it. So I was like, well, the original plan was, why don't you do a prequel in our sequel about sequels, but then the prequel idea, because it just gets more meta. And that was something that there was like a Letterboxd review of somebody who was like, this is the most meta shit, something, I can't stand it. And I was like, well, then I'm going to go full meta on you. It's going to go so much further, that guy inspired me, whoever you are.
The danger of writing a bad review.
Yeah. It's so weird. Like Letterboxd people either hate this movie or are obsessed with it. It's such a weird community.
Yep.
But anyway, I had neither here nor there. But we, as we're kind of getting along, and so Anthony, and then we were actually on the set of Old Man. We were making that movie, and Lucky McKee's film, and Anthony was working crew on that, and he would like come by my station where I was at, we were producing. And he'd be like, okay, so I have this idea. What do you think if like this and this and this happened? I'm like, ooh, that's fun. And then he'd go back and he'd talk to his writer, John Karsko, and they'd come back with another idea. And we kept iterating, and it just was a lot of fun. And so that kind of made sense. And I really wanted to do, again, a sequel to a segment because he hadn't seen that. So if you haven't seen it, that's what excites me all the time, in filmmaking. So that was something we wanted to do. And then, as far as the other three, it was very tricky because we take a lot of pride. We want this to be kind of a diverse group. We want to have different perspectives that are going to make things that Cameron and I couldn't write. We actually started writing segments, and we wrote 2 segments for this one, but then cut out. Obviously, we wrote and directed, the whole main portion, but then we also wrote the last segment, We're So Dead. And then we had another segment that we had written, but we were like, you know what, this is too much us. Like we need to bring in other perspectives and get some other angles of this, because there's so much to explore, and not even just all our sense of humor. Like it's definitely in our world, but not just all completely our sense of humor. So the next one we brought in was Alexander Barreto, which Ashley Sneed, our producing partner and our wonderful line producer on everything. She's known Alex for many years. She's a wonderful actress, talented filmmaker, and she made a short called Lady Hater that played at Tribeca. And I saw the short, and I was like, it was hilarious. It was so good. It was so well done, so clever. But I was like, oh, I would love to work with Alex one day. But I didn't know if she was a horror fan or not. And then Ashley just got casually was like, oh, by the way, like Alex is like a diehard horror fan. I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh my God. So then we really, immediately reached out, interviewed her. And that's how it works. Like we talked to the filmmakers. We're like, look, this is what we're thinking about. There's not a lot of money in it for you, but you're going to have some freedom. Now we're going to give you some parameters, but within those parameters, you have the freedom to make what you want that fits in this world. Please watch the movie, see this, understand this. And my direction with Alex was really, hey, I want a feminist take. I want to focus on kind of this transition of horror, like going out of the 80s and into the 90s. And she got very literal with that in a great way. And then she made Welcome to the 90s, you know, and focused on Final Girls, and, you know, and all the girls in that are like friends of ours, basically. Elizabeth True and
Right on.
Lexi Banner and all that. It was just so great. Shayna Shruten was in Revealer, you know, that had produced before. So it was just fun to kind of get that game together, and she just absolutely killed it. And then for We're So Dead, we needed to find a director for that. And we went to a number of different people, trying to figure out, you know, who was the right fit and availability, and things kept happening. And meanwhile, we had already shot a couple other segments. So we wait to shoot the main movie until all the segments are shot. So that way we can curate and customize how you go in and out of those segments in smart ways.
It's good.
Yeah, we wrote ourselves into a corner there where we had to write the rooms connected to the segment. And so the things that happened in the room are connected to the segment. So we had to kind of wait and then pivot.
It's
But
like
that
that.
was,
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
well, that's by design though too. At the same time, like, so it is like kind of putting yourself in the corner. But we wanted, again, I wanted the meta. Like, how do you get more meta? Well, I was like, well, how about we are watching the segments with the characters in the movie watching the segments, you know? So it's like, it's about, there is this kind of like underlining of like creating this communal experience again and hoping that. So like, we're all watching movies together. So it's like the actors in the movie are watching the movie with us. And then we're trying to figure out, oh, how are they going to escape this room from what they learned, you know, and what's there. And some we were able to get more detailed than others. And because Cameron and I wrote We're So Dead, that's why that one ties so much more into the ending there.
Okay.
It was a little easier for us to kind of make happen. But, you know, it was like, how do you figure that out? So, and then the director of that. So actually, oddly enough, the first Scare Package released in Sitges in Spain was our world premiere. And, you know, Cameron and I were there, Jeremy King was there. And that night, and there was a short that played before it that Rachel Wiggins, our director, had produced. And, you know, we got to know Rachel, we were kind of hanging out. And then that night we were going to drive her back to the hotel where she was at. And Jeremy King, Rad Chad, was driving. He's sober at this time, so we're safe, you know, we're good. But he makes a wrong turn and goes down a one-way road, and there's a police trap there, and they stop us.
Oh yeah, of
and
course.
So then they're coming up to the window, and we're doing breathalyzers, and they're wanting his passport, and we didn't realize,
Wow.
you know, the math was off, and Jeremy's freaking out, and Rachel is just sitting in the back seat the whole time. I'm like, oh my god, I'm so sorry.
I'm trying to do a favor. Yeah.
I've known her for like an hour, and Jeremy, it turns out you need an international driver's license to drive in foreign countries.
Whoa.
Really?
So Jeremy's getting it, and then it was just basically, they were just like, oh, you can give us some money and it'll end.
Nah,
Yeah,
of course.
Basically, they had a credit card machine where you could swipe your credit card and pay it.
I love that.
It was
Yeah,
ridiculous.
I mean, it was a lot. Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I don't know how much. It might have been $1,000.
Holy shit.
It was for all of us combined, you know, like, but still.
Why did you guys have to pay? You weren't
Oh,
driving.
because Rachel was the only one who had her seatbelt on. That's why, I think.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's right. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah.
It
So
Damn.
it was
probably
wild.
should have admitted on a podcast, but my mom would yell.
But you know, so we bonded with Rachel that night, and we got to know her, and then she had been on our podcast as well, Paper Street Podcast, and you know, so you know, we got to know her, and then I was like, you know, what would be fun? What if these kids were Australian? Like that, there became something fun about this, and kind of making this feel a little global and kind of feeling a little different. And so we reached out to Rachel, and she was about to do the new Wolf Creek, which has since been delayed. But you know, I knew what she had done in Dead House Dark. She was a part of as well on Shudder. So it was just, I was like, look, she's a talented filmmaker. She was so gung ho. Like, we put her through the ringer that night, and she was so kind. Maybe she'd be willing to work with us again. And we were really glad that she came on board. And then the last filmmaker that we brought in was Jed Shepard, you know, from Host. And
Yeah.
that, oddly enough, you know, he wrote and produced Host. And I was talking to Jed about helping me contact another filmmaker. And he had coordinated that, and then we were like working out the details, but then that timing also fell through on that filmmaker. And then I remember Jed, we're like on a Zoom, and he's like, you know, I'm right here. You know? And I'm like, oh shit, I'm sorry, dude. You know, you know, he's like, you know, he's like, and I'm Filipino, and like, it's diverse, and like everything. He's like, come on, we're great. You know, let's do this. I can get all the host girls in it. And I was like, oh wow, this could be fun. You know, maybe there's something here. And then we were playing around with ideas. I wanted to do, again, 90s, 2000s horror. You know, you're trying to find what that focus is. And J horror was such a big thing at that time. And I was like, look, I want to do a Ring or a Grudge type type segment, and we were kind of like back and forth on some ideas, and then randomly we're just like on WhatsApp talking, and I just said, I was like, hey, you know what was fun, like when I was in, you know, growing up, I remember, so we got Laserdisc, which was like, I'm dating myself here, but pre DVDs, you know, and these big ass DVDs basically.
Yeah.
And and the first four that we got were like Star Wars, you know, Jaws, Raiders Lost Ark, and 3 Men and a Baby. And the reason why we got 3 Men and a Baby is because I wanted my friends to come over, and Sean Talley, who's a producer with me now, he was one of those friends that would come over, and we would pause the movie to see the 3 Men and a Baby Ghost, 3 Men and a Baby Ghost on Laserdisc, because we were fascinated by this. Like there was no, the internet was like just kind of getting started, and it wasn't like really a thing yet. So it was just something you were told about, and then there were all these rumors, and nobody knew the truth. And so that was really funny. I was like, well, what if the 3 Men and a Baby Ghost like comes out of a Laserdisc and kills them? And then Jed's like, oh my God, we got, you know, and then we ran off from there. So, but that really was just one of those like fun ideas that kind of like played into that. And I love, and again, I love the idea that some people now are like Googling 3 Men and a Baby Ghost, you know?
Oh,
and
it's so fucking creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It makes me so happy. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, and I think the way that you guys come in and out of those segments is genius, especially in how you are spoofing on Saw. Like, I think like any other movie, like you would have found a genius way to do it, no matter what you were spoofing. But Saw seems so perfect for it because you have all these tape recordings and video recordings that are already a part of that franchise. So it really works really well.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call anything genius, but you know.
It's so obvious now. The original idea when we talked about was just like, oh, what if it was just like escape rooms? And it's just like, why did we not go like, it took us a second to get to that, but yeah, it's just so, Saw is, especially of all the 90s stuff, it's so fertile with things. There's just a lot of iconic different things in Saw.
Yeah, there's so many tropes. It really throws so many things in a blender. And like, you know, I have, you know, the Rad Chat puppet behind me and all that, and these things, and there's just so much stuff that they, you know, credit to them, you know, threw out there in like fun ways, and it just kind of gave us this like playground, you know, that's like, okay, well, this, you know, Alex Breto's segment deals with, you know, final girls on New Year's Eve, and there's a party in a sorority house, and they're talking about beer bongs and all this stuff. Well, okay, let's do a Saw beer pong table, you know. And it's so crazy to be like, okay, I'm talking to my production designer who hasn't seen all these movies, you know.
Oh.
and I'm like, he's like, oh, okay, so I'm getting a beer pong table. I'm like, okay, so you are. But here's the pictures. I want it to look like this table. He's like, what is that? And it's like, I want it to look like the table where the pendulum kill.
Oh, sure.
So I was like, I want the pendulum kill kind of table, and I want this, and then we're gonna have to like raise the cups up somehow. We got to figure that out. And then I want the cups to have like barbed wire on them.
Yeah.
What the hell? Yeah, and then there's poison that's in them, and then, you know, this, and then there's gonna be a force field, and it's like, and people look at me like, what?
Yeah,
you know,
you're getting so far away from beer pong.
It's like, I don't know what the hell this is, and that's what has to happen so much, especially, you know, on an indie like this, where, you know, Cameron's my first AD, and it's literally just the two of us and my DP Andrew Baird, who's just wonderful. We're just like, nobody else really gets what we're doing. And we're just like, trust me, it's in my head. I'm editing this as it goes, you know, and we're like along for the ride, you know, and what that could be. And there's just so much improvisation that has to happen in the moment, you know, and but thankfully our crew trusts us at this point and let us like roll with it.
It was pretty crazy what we attempted to do with this movie, considering, you know, what the budget was and how many days we shot, which is not very many. Like whole rooms were being shot in a single day, and it's
wow.
Just like, it's crazy what we attempted to do, and we just kind of put our heads down and said, well, we'll figure it out, and if we have to cut some shots, we'll cut some shots, and we'll make it work. And
we did. I mean, we had to. I mean, look, the night before the last shooting, the last day of shooting, I rewrote the ending scene. There was actually a big scene where, you know, Rich was going to get impaled with like stuck against the video wall, Rich Summers' character, and with a pitchfork and all this and different things, and there was a big kind of action set piece, and we just weren't going to have time to do it. There was no way. And I was like, okay. And I had characters who got separated from the group, and I had to figure out what to do. So I just went over to Graham Skipper and Shakira Janae Pay, who's playing Dwight and Kimmy, and I was like, look, you're going to sit on this side of the and then we're just going to riff about how, because one of the things I noticed is that when you have like this mass killer, they'll be stalking these kids. If you really think about it, if somebody did like an overhead at that time of like where all the kids are, it's like, why didn't you just kill that person? You just walk past to get to that person. If you really looked at the logistics and the map of it, it would make no sense.
Yeah.
So I was like, let's again, okay, there you go. Here's the flashlight scene again for us in the second movie. Let's lean into it. And then I just have Graham, and it's like, okay, you're here, and you're like, oh, it's great. He never comes over.
Yeah.
And that gets one of our biggest laughs.
Yeah.
And that was me literally the night before rewriting a scene because we couldn't shoot what we needed to shoot with their characters. And I was like, all I have time for is to sit you. And literally that's one take. We had no time. It's one take, sit down, roll. And I'm like, okay, here's your new lines. They didn't even know the lines. There was no new script. It was me telling them.
Wow.
And they would say them, and that was it. And then we were able to intercut that to make the whole thing work. So those are the type of like in the moment. Well, and another example I give is there's our big Dream Warriors moment where Sam, played by Byron Brown, kind of comes out of the TV and all that. And that was a huge setup and took a ton of time. And it's blue screen him and blue this and, all these things. But while we were shooting that, we were shooting in another room. I think it was some of them in the B stuff, I think at the same time. So I am running back and forth between the two rooms directing. So I'm getting them ready in the Bs. Then I run over and they're getting him all in the makeup because it takes so long to get him through the makeup and his head through the TV and all this stuff. And then we get there and then they're getting ready. And then once we're done shooting over there, they're done. The actors are wrapped. So we can't afford to keep them. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, well, we're still going to shoot this. So that is everything that you see Sam saying in the TV, that he was never in the room the same time the actors were in that room.
Wow.
So it's me standing at each of those spots, and I would just create different eye lines, and I'm just like yelling at him, like, I'm going to fuck you up, man. And he's like, oh, this is the greatest day of my life. And he's like fighting me, and I'm like, okay, you're really mad at Graham, and I'm being Graham Skipper the whole time and all this. And then I'm the voice of the puppet, and I'm creating an eye line for the puppet.
Oh, yeah.
And all these things. And we had it, and then we did that. So then we shot all of that from that direction, and that's just him literally arguing with me. And then the next day he's gone, and now I'm standing there being Sam, talking to all of them, and they're reacting to me.
I think
and
that's the edit people really want to see.
It's not
arguing with you.
It's not good. That is how I ended up doing the voice of the puppet, though, because it wasn't intended to be that way. It just became funny the way he interacted with him, and we just kind of decided to leave that in and make the puppet more like an innocuous worker that's just like okay, whatever, man, like not doing a bit, just being more straight-laced, and so that kind of happened that way too.
Jeremy King is so really mad he didn't get to voice the puppet.
Yeah, he does not. But Jeremy could only do a bit. So like if you did the puppet, it would be something great, but it would be like a thing. And I wanted it to be innocuous, and droll and kind of dry. And but it's all good.
Yeah, you needed a 9-to-5 puppet.
I did. Yeah, correct.
So Cameron, are you currently trying to talk Aaron into doing a third one right now?
I mean, I am of the opinion that I would like to do scare package movies until someone tells us not to.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. December 22nd, people may not watch it, and they'll tell us not to. Hopefully, that's not the case. Hopefully, people watch it and they like it. But I think there's such a fun. It doesn't have to be the thing we do, immediately after. But there's such a fun, fertile world of ideas and clever stuff that we can do, and spinoffs and there's just a lot of cool ideas, I think, that we still haven't hit on. There's a lot of great directors that we haven't worked with yet, and I would love to keep doing scare package movies. They're the most fun of all the stuff we do.
Yeah, well, at least they're fun, because it sounds like it's a fucking nightmare.
I mean, it's all hard. Making movies is all hard. They're all difficult. But yeah, scare package, you're doing it with your friends. There's not a lot of big brother oversight. You just get to be as creative as possible. I mean, yeah, it's the fun version of filmmaking.
Yeah, it's definitely hard, but they're the hardest we're making, but they're also the most fun because it's one of those, when you're making a horror film, what's so great about it is you get to do these big gags and everybody like gathers around and it re-energizes the crew. Like everybody just stands up and cheers. And, like you talk about that drive sequence. I mean, I remember everyone watching that as it was happening. The same with there's a scene with the Devil's like Impaler when he comes out and everybody's like watching these scenes. They're all gathered around and laughing and all this and the vomit scenes and stuff. And it just everybody's like, okay, this is like we're in now, So you have those long days and you do a big gag and it works and people see it work. Then they're like, ooh, I helped make that a reality, and it invigorates everyone and it gets really exciting. But it is funny. So Cameron, Alex, and Sean, our other producers, they made a list of like, I don't know how many you guys did, like 20 scare package.
No, there was 30 because the last one was scare package triple X. XXL.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was 30. We got drunk one night during prep on Pale Door and created all kinds of different scare package ideas. So
Love it.
Yeah.
Stock's still somewhere, so we've got 28 more to go.
It is. Well, the original title of this, I'll mention on Twitter at some point because I still have the graphic even made for it, was TOO, Too Scared, Too Packaged. TOO.
Yeah.
So dumb. And actually, Craig, who unfortunately his last day at Shudder was today, when we're recording this. But Craig Engler, I remember him being on the call and he's like, yeah, we're not doing that. It needs to be a 2. It needs to be scare package 2. And I'm like, okay, all right,
Okay, so we have a little bit of oversight.
Yeah, number 4 though, you can get it for number 4 for sure.
We'll see. We'll see what it is. But yeah, I mean, the one idea that I do think is really great that Cameron and them had was like an alternate scare package thing. And it's like Scare Package Presents. And we wanted to do all LGBTQIA directors, and it was going to be called Out for Delivery, like Scare Package Out for Delivery.
Okay.
And it's, I thought that was fun. I was like, that's a really fun idea. There's something there. But we do, we have right now, we're kind of at this precipice where we've stopped like thinking about it because again, we just want to make sure see if this hits or not,
Yeah.
And if it does hit, we have 2 very wild directions to go with Scare Package 3. I think when you guys saw it at Nightmares Fest, at the end, there was a tag that said, Rad Chad will be back, kind of thing. I love the Back to the Future kind of world of that. I think that's fun.
Yeah.
In the version on Shudder, we actually cut that out because even though it's a fun gag, we have another idea for Scare Package 3 that's even more ridiculous, and we're trying to decide where we want to go.
Okay.
And again, but again, which of those will happen will kind of be determined by folks liking it and watching it and all that good stuff. So.
Right on. Well, I'm really excited to see everybody's reactions too when it comes out. I'm sure they're gonna love it, man. Like I know you're in that weird period where you're worried about it, but like it's so goddamn funny. Like I don't know anybody who's gonna hate it. It's
the right
too
people
much
are
fun.
gonna find it.
There you go. The right people.
Yeah. Look, I think if you didn't like the first one, you might just want to skip this one. So that's probably a thing. But I do love that people are now discovering. We've been on the festival circuit, and a ton of people didn't see the first one. And they are watching this like, ooh, that's really fun. And now they're going back and watching the first one. So that's really cool, and look, again, this was a movie that was made because we didn't know if we'd be able to make movies. So it was kind of like this throw it at the wall, see it if it sticks thing. And then in turn, the amount of people, it was released in June, peak pandemic when like we didn't know what the hell was going on. The world was totally, Black Lives Matter was at its peak and so many things that we were trying to figure out ourselves and our place and like in the world. And then this like really dumb movie, like, I think we're clever, but dumb clever, if you want to call it. But this like really weird, silly movie drops on the last drive-in and Shudder. And then all these people come up and they're like, I needed that, I just needed that escape. I just needed to kind of, get away for a minute. And that escape is why we make movies. I mean, it was a big part of my childhood and growing up. I wasn't allowed to watch horror films, and I had to sneak around to do it and all that. And I think we talked about this last time I was on the podcast, and it was important to me. But then, I had a not the best family life, with some things with my parents, and I just remember no matter what was going on, I could put on a movie, and many times it was like the Dream Warriors, was one of the ones. And I just was so immersed in that world, and I loved it so much that like nothing mattered for those 2 hours, and I was like, okay again. And so the fact that, whatever does, maybe there's a dozen people out there that had something like that, that is fuel for us in every way. It just is so magical that someone I don't know in a place I haven't been to is watching this stupid idea that Cameron had, where I text everybody, I'm like, the 10,000 bees he put inside of us, and they're laughing at that. And that gives them something, is the greatest gift. It's a drug, and I want more of it. Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We like to close out every interview by asking what your dream double feature would be at the drive-in. If you could play any 2 movies, what would you play?
And it can be, related to Scare Package 2, kind of like a teaser for something similar, like maybe to watch after or along with, or just 2 random movies that you'd love to see together at a drive-in.
I remember this question, and I've listened to your podcast. I should know this. I should have come prepared. I mean, I would say, look, in Scare Package 2, obviously, Saw 1, Saw 2, huge influence throughout it. Hellbound, huge influence. Dream Warriors, huge influence. Friday 13 Part 2 has a decent amount in this as well, including the whole open, which is just, our open is the Friday 13 Part 2 open. It's just her on a bed, like going, no, 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 and trying to flashbacks forever of the first movie, which is so silly. So I think a combination of those could work really well. I mean, I know that right now, Kim and I are working on a horror sports movie. So
cool.
I would love to propose, because it makes no sense, something that's like, Evil Dead 2 with like the Mighty Ducks.
Okay.
And just see, like, because again, I think there's heart in all these movies, and like how you can do it. That's like, and I guess that's not a horror double feature, but there's something fun about that to me that I think is would be a blast.
Yeah, I mean, most drive-ins usually start with a kids movie and then end with a horror movie, so that's you're sticking with it. What about you?
Yeah, I'll stick with that. I will start with Monster Squad.
Yeah.
Nothing probably hit me harder as a 8 to 10-year-old than Monster Squad did. And then Nightmare on Elm Street, just because that's the beacon. That's the one, like that's kind of the franchise that I always was first and foremost. And I think that one horror movie was the biggest influence on me. So yeah, Monster Squad and Nightmare on Elm Street, that would be mine too.
See, that's a fun double feature. One that you hope to go there, and there's a themed popcorn bucket.
Oh, that's great.
Well, we did recently rewatch the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and I'm very much looking forward to whenever we do eventually rewatch all the Saw movies. I think we're probably going to finish it with Scare Package 2. I think that's the absolute best way to do it.
Oh God, good luck. And again, I love, Darren and his work, and Josh and all these writers and everyone. So like a lot of Patrick, a lot of great writers and great people on that. It's credit to them that they've made such a successful franchise, from James and Lee out there to Lee there. But it's still, because it's so successful that you have to make sequels. Yeah. So it kind of goes such a crazy
They had to make
place.
them fast.
And they were like every Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every year you got to pump this out. So it is great that, like, I mean, literally one of the sequels, there's like a woman who was a reporter in the audience who like raises her hand one time and then becomes like a character in the movie. And so that excites me, that like we've set up all these characters, and one of our ideas in the third one deals with that, of like any character you see could, like, at any point in the Scare Package world, can become a much bigger character later, and you didn't realize that they were. And I think that's, again, taking, like Cam said, retconning, taking something, because again, well, I don't want to give away the ending, but like there are things that happen that you're like, wait a second, that's not how the first movie went. But if you pause it and you just show this little clip, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, that's what was going on. And it's so ridiculous.
Well, guys, thanks again for chatting with us. And where and when can people see, one more time, where and when can people see Scare Package 2, Rad Chad's Revenge?
December 22nd. It's a Christmas gift for everyone. So, you know, and even if you don't like it, you can just put it on the background and mute it if you want. I mean,
On
that's fine.
Shutter. Don't leave that
On
part out.
Shutter. Yeah,
Yeah.
Shutter. Yes. And then we'll be coming to physical media in 2023. So
Rad.
Right on. Well, thank you so much,
Rad.
guys. Yeah.
Thank you guys for having us. It was
yeah, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate this.
Happy holidays, dudes.
Yeah,
You.
you too. You too.